What if the Red Thirst had claimed Sanguinius before the final battle? What if the Angel of Baal, the Emperor's beloved son, had embraced the hunger buried deep within his blood? What if, in that fateful moment aboard the Vengeful Spirit, the War Master himself had fallen, not to the Emperor's hand, but to the fury of a Primarch consumed by wrath and hunger? Imagine the galaxy in chaos, not because of Horus's victory, but because the noblest among the Emperor's sons became something far greater and far darker. What if the very embodiment of purity, of hope, became the first god of blood? What if the death of Horus was only the beginning, and the birth of a new power shook the foundations of reality itself? Today, we explore that grim, forbidden path, the story of Sanguinius, the Red Angel, who let his thirst rise, who drank deep from the warp, and who became a legend the galaxy would never forget. This is a tale of sacrifice, corruption, and transcendence, a tale of light consumed by crimson, of the angel who became a god. If you dare, listen closely, for in this story, every winged shadow, every drop of blood, every shattered soul matters. Stay with us as we journey into a world that might have been, the world where the Crimson God rose and the Imperium would bleed forever. Above the Imperium's throne world, the skies burned red. The walls of the imperial palace shattered beneath endless fire, and the last of the legions fought to hold back the tide of doom. At the Eternity Gate, the Angel of Baal stood tall, wings torn and armor scorched, yet his resolve unbroken. Every heartbeat echoed with the cries of his sons. Every breath carried the iron taste of despair. Within him, the red thirst stirred, a hunger that had been chained by will alone, now whispering, clawing, demanding release. He did not falter. He would ascend alone toward the Vengeful Spirit to confront the monster who had doomed so many. His few surviving warriors fell behind, their courage no match for the horrors yet to come. And as Sanguinius moved into the orbiting fortress of death, he knew that this journey was not just a battle against his brother. It was a battle against himself, against the hunger that threatened to claim his soul. The dying sky of Terra bore witness to his flight as the last angel of humanity rose toward destiny, his shadow cast across a galaxy on the brink of annihilation. Above Terra, the sky burned as if the heavens themselves had been torn open, a searing wound of fire, smoke, and shadow that stretched from horizon to horizon. Lightning crackled across blackened clouds, twisted and jagged by the psychic screams of millions, while streaks of crimson and molten gold flared across the dying sun, painting the shattered spires of the imperial palace in hues of blood and flame. Rivers of molten metal and boiling blood carved their paths through streets and plazas, carrying corpses of humans, angels, and traitors alike toward unknown graves, while the air vibrated with the resonance of agony, echoing with cries that seemed to reach even the void beyond the atmosphere. Flames consumed monuments to humanity's glory, spitting sparks into the choking smoke, while shattered towers crumbled, sending showers of stone and fire cascading into the streets below. The siege had reached its final hour. The Emperor's armies were battered beyond endurance, faltering against the relentless tide of traitor legions and demonic abominations. Yet atop the Eternity Gate, one figure remained unbowed. Sanguinius, Angel of Baal, Primarch of the Blood Angels, hovered with wings shredded and blackened by flame and shrapnel, his golden armor scorched, dented, and etched with centuries of battle. Every feather, every dent, every scar of his body told a story of sacrifice and unending war. Around him, the surviving blood angels hurled themselves against impossible odds, firing bolters, swinging power swords, casting themselves into fire and chaos with unflinching courage. Each brother who fell, each dying scream fed the whispers of the red thirst that coiled and roared within his blood. The voices of the fallen called to him, urging surrender, promising freedom, dominion, and the strength to crush every enemy. The red thirst, ancient and sentient, stirred like a predator awakening from centuries of slumber. It had whispered before, subtle and quiet, but now it roared, clawing at his mind, threading fire into his veins. Surrender. Take what is yours. Ascend beyond flesh. Consume. Become. It was a fire that pulsed with every heartbeat, every drop of blood spilled on the palace stones, every agonized cry of the fallen below. Memories surged, crashing into his mind with tidal force, the laughter of lost brothers on distant worlds, sons nurtured and slaughtered, the emperor's unwavering, silent gaze. The red thirst promised release from burden, release from mortality, release from responsibility. It promised power enough to reshape the galaxy, but at the cost of his very essence. Below, the battlefield was a living storm of death. Loyalists and traitors collided in a tempest of steel, fire, and psychic torment. Bolter fire tore through armor and bone alike. Demons erupted from the warp, twisted monstrosities with eyes burning with malevolent light, claws dripping with the ichor of countless souls. Explosions shattered buildings, sending debris into smoke-choked skies. The blood angels, though heroic beyond measure, were slowly ground down, their courage feeding the chorus of temptation rising from the thirst within their primarch. Every fallen brother became a voice, every agonized scream a thread in the web urging him to embrace the hunger. Sanguinius's gaze turned skyward toward the vengeful spirit. The colossal ship orbited Terra like a predator circling its prey, alive with warp energy and pulsing psychic resonance. Shadows writhed across its hull, demons and corrupted angels shifting in and out of perception, feeding on fear and despair. The ship's presence reached into the minds of those below, tugging at memories, amplifying guilt and grief, testing the limits of will. The red thirst clawed at him, promising victory, offering power beyond comprehension, whispering that if he surrendered even a fragment of himself, he could end this war in a single cataclysmic moment. He leapt into the void. Windless vacuum tore at his shredded wings, the heat from burning streets below licking at him, the psychic scream of dying men, angels, and demons pulsing through the void like a heartbeat. The red thirst surged, coiling and thrashing within him, a living storm of hunger demanding release. It promised dominion over all opposition, the ability to end the war in a single instant, yet demanded that he surrender his soul, his mind, and his very nature. Every beat of his wings was a battle against the predator within, every motion a defiance of the voice urging him to fall into oblivion. Beneath him, Terra burned as if the planet itself wept in agony. Flames licked across blackened monuments, molten rivers carried corpses, psychic currents hummed with the echoes of pain and despair. The ruins were labyrinthine, the air thick with smoke, ash, and metallic tang of blood. The red thirst roared, a cacophony of voices, promising release, power, and ascendance.
Memories and visions collided, his sons falling, brothers dying on distant worlds, the Emperor's unwavering, silent gaze. The temptation grew, gnawing at his mind, clawing at his will. Yet still he pressed onward. Every beat of his wings was a statement of defiance, every breath a refusal to yield. The vengeful spirit loomed larger, hull shimmering with warp energy, psychic currents crackling like jagged lightning across its surface. Shadows writhed, feeding on anguish, hunger, and fear. Yet he pressed forward. He was the Angel of Baal, Emperor's favored son, the last hope of humanity. He would confront Horus. He would face his brother. Whatever horrors awaited, he would endure. Below, the Blood Angels fought with heroism unmatched, throwing themselves into fire and slaughter, dying with cries that rose on psychic winds, each sacrifice feeding the thirst, each death urging Sanguinius forward. Yet still he soared, wings spread wide, torn yet magnificent, eyes blazing, heart unyielding, soul aflame.
The sky itself bore witness to his ascent, the last angel climbing through fire, smoke, and psychic torment toward the fate that would decide the destiny of all humanity. Above the clouds, the void stretched before him, endless and cold, yet alive with psychic echoes. The ship pulsed, breathing, testing, alive with anticipation. Every heartbeat, every flap of wings, every thought collided with the voices of the thirst, the memories of blood and war, the screaming ghosts of the fallen demanding he yield, promising godhood. Yet he did not falter. He pressed onward, defiance etched into every motion. The final angel rising through the dying sky, a singular point of light against the chaos, a storm of red and gold ascending toward vengeance, salvation, and apocalypse. From the burning world below, the angel rose into darkness. Behind him, Terra screamed, its atmosphere scarred by fire, its cities drowning beneath tides of blood and ash. The echo of that dying world clung to his wings like smoke. He flew upward through a sky split by storms, through layers of ruin, through the weight of 10,000 dying prayers. The air around him grew thin, then vanished, replaced by the cold whisper of the void. Beneath him, lightning still clawed at the clouds, seeking him as if unwilling to let him go. Ahead loomed the vengeful spirit, the War Master's throne of corruption. Once a proud flagship, now a living god wound, a cathedral of madness adrift in orbit above the cradle of mankind. The ship's hull pulsed with faint, unnatural light. Great rents opened and closed across its surface like breathing flesh. The armor plates shimmered between metal and muscle, veins of warp energy crawling across their length. Even at this distance, he could hear the vessel's heartbeat, a slow, thunderous rhythm echoing through the void, each pulse an obscene parody of life. As Sanguinius drew closer, the psychic stench of the warp thickened until it became tangible. The void around him warped and twisted. Shapes flickered at the edges of sight, tendrils of thought and hunger, the fragmented remains of demons bound into the ship's structure. His mind burned with their whispers, words not meant for mortal comprehension. They sang to the red thirst inside him, harmonizing with the hunger already clawing at his soul. He landed upon the outer hull, his boots sinking slightly into the blasphemous metal flesh. Every step left behind a faint trail of blood that vanished almost instantly, absorbed by the ship itself. The vessel welcomed him,
recognizing the taint it sensed within his veins. Runes of chaos flared and dimmed beneath his feet as he crossed the boundary between cold vacuum and the interior of the War Master's sanctum. Inside, the vengeful spirit was not a ship, but a labyrinth. Corridors twisted impossibly, folding back upon themselves in defiance of Euclidean space. Bulkheads throbbed with faint warmth, coated in a thin sheen of living matter that shuddered as he passed. Lights flickered like dying stars, their glow filtered through clouds of red mist. The air reeked of ozone, incense, and burnt iron, the scent of death and ritual blended into one. He was not alone. Behind him, a handful of blood angels followed, his most devoted sons, remnants of the 9th Legion who had survived the slaughter at the Eternity Gate. Their armor was broken and blackened, their faces pale beneath shattered helms. Yet still they came, their loyalty a flame that even the warp could not extinguish. Together they advanced, weapons ready, hearts heavy with devotion and despair. But the ship had no intention of allowing them to reach their destination unchallenged. From the walls came movement, shadows given form, echoes of the lunar wolves they had once called brothers. Ghosts in armor, their eyes glowing with hateful light, stepped forward from the fog. Their movements were jerky, wrong, as though guided by invisible strings. They did not speak. They simply advanced. The blood angels met them with fury. Bolters thundered, the sound swallowed by the unnatural acoustics of the corridor. Chainswords screamed, biting through corrupted ceramonite. Each blow sent gouts of dark blood splashing across the walls, feeding the ship. For every foe struck down, 2 more emerged, birthed from the shifting corridors themselves. The air thickened with psychic pressure. Every moment became a test of will as the warp gnawed at their sanity. Sanguinius fought without hesitation. His sword cut through demons and twisted brothers alike, arcs of golden energy burning through flesh and steel. Yet with every kill, the red thirst surged stronger. The scent of blood filled the air, a perfume more intoxicating than any he had ever known. His senses sharpened to unbearable clarity, the heartbeat of each enemy, the taste of iron on the air, the trembling pulse of his own veins calling for release. One by one, his sons fell. Their deaths were beautiful and terrible, crimson petals scattered across the living decks of the War Master's ship. Each soul extinguished left a hollow ache in his heart, and in that hollow, the hunger took root. He could feel it growing, a dark flower blooming in his chest, its roots spreading through his spirit. It whispered of power, of release, of salvation through surrender. Still he pressed onward. The corridor stretched into eternity, becoming more organic, more alive. At times he walked through tunnels that resembled arteries, their walls slick and pulsating with luminous fluid. At others he found himself in chambers vast as cathedrals, filled with the suspended bodies of the slain, their faces locked in expressions of worship and agony. The ship was a shrine built from suffering, every inch soaked in the psychic residue of countless deaths. Through it all, the red thirst followed him. It was no longer a whisper, but a storm. Visions assaulted him, flashes of fangs, rivers of blood, stars falling from the heavens like drops of scarlet rain. He saw himself as a god of crimson fire, wings black as night, feeding on the souls of the damned. He felt the rush of absolute dominion, the thrill of power without end, and for a moment he almost accepted it. But then came memory. He remembered Baal before the dark times, the children he had saved, the peace he had built from ashes. He remembered his brothers, now scattered, fallen, or corrupted beyond redemption. He remembered the Emperor, distant, cold, yet still the light by which he had guided his existence. The hunger recoiled at those memories, screaming as purity burned against its corruption. The ship retaliated. The walls shuddered and split open, revealing gaping mouths filled with jagged teeth. Tendrils lashed outward, striking at him and his last surviving sons. Psychic bile sprayed from the ceilings, corroding armor and flesh alike. Demons burst from the ruptures, winged and clawed, their forms unstable, their shrieks splitting the air. For every creature he destroyed, the ship grew stronger, feeding on the violence. He fought like a storm given form. Golden wings beat against the rising tide, his blade cleaving through monstrosities of nightmare. Blood, red, black, and shimmering, rained down upon him. It hissed when it touched his armor, eating through gold to reveal raw muscle beneath. His own blood mixed with that of the fallen until the deck beneath his feet became a river of gore. He was drenched in it, consumed by it, and still he fought on. When the last demon fell, silence returned. Only 2 of his sons remained. Their armor hung in tatters, their eyes hollow. They looked upon their father not with devotion, but with fear. For in his gaze they saw the reflection of the beast that lurked behind his beauty, the hunger he fought to contain. He turned from them, ashamed, unwilling to see their terror. They followed without a word, knowing that death awaited them soon. As they advanced deeper, the air grew thicker, charged with the psychic essence of the warp. Time lost meaning. Minutes stretched into hours, hours into eternity. The ship seemed endless, each corridor identical, yet subtly different, as if reality itself had become uncertain. Shadows lengthened, whispering his name. Blood seeped from the walls in slow rivulets, forming sigils that pulsed with malignant light. At last they reached a vast antechamber. Here, the air vibrated with the resonance of a single overwhelming presence. The walls were carved from the remains of dead titans, their bones twisted into arches and pillars. The floor was a mirror of black glass, reflecting nothing but the red glow of the warp. At the far end stood the throne gate, immense, ancient, alive. It was fashioned from gold long since defiled, its surface crawling with shifting images, battles won and lost, brothers slain, futures that would never come to pass. Sanguinius felt the presence beyond that gate, the storm of power, the heartbeat of corruption, the echo
of the brother he had once loved. The red thirst surged in response, exultant, triumphant. It whispered that the moment had come, that all he had to do was let go. Behind him, his last 2 sons fell to their knees, overwhelmed by exhaustion and despair. He felt their lives flicker and fade, drawn out of them by the ship itself. He did not turn. Their deaths were one more weight upon his soul, one more reason to end this. He stood alone before the gate, his armor cracked, his wings torn, his blood dripping onto the black mirror beneath his feet. The reflection staring back was no longer golden, but crimson, eyes burning with unearthly fire. The ship itself seemed to hold its breath, waiting. He reached out and placed his hand upon the gate. The metal was warm, alive. It shivered at his touch, recognizing something within him that it feared. The symbols upon its surface writhed and twisted, forming a single image, an angel with broken wings,
standing over a fallen sun. The doors began to open. Beyond them awaited the throne of the War Master and the end of all things.
The gates parted with a sound like the rending of worlds. The light beyond was not light, but revelation, a blinding storm of gold and crimson, radiance and decay entwined. Sanguinius stepped through, and the air itself seemed to bow beneath the weight of presence. Every breath he drew burned like fire. Every heartbeat thundered like a drum of war. He had entered the heart of the Vengeful Spirit. Before him lay the War Master's sanctum, a chamber vast beyond measure. The ceiling stretched into darkness, vanishing into storm clouds of warp energy that rolled and churned like a living sea. Pillars of twisted bone rose upward, crowned with skulls that whispered fragments of memory. The laughter of warriors long dead, the cries of brothers slain. The floor was a mosaic of shattered glass and molten gold, each fragment reflecting visions of what might have been. Terra unburnt, the legions united, a future never born. And at the center, upon a dais of blackened marble, sat the throne of the War Master. It was a monument to blasphemy, forged from the bones of angels, fused with the metal of 1,000 fallen ships. Chains of runes and iron wrapped around its base like serpents, their ends vanishing into cracks that bled light. The seat pulsed faintly, as though the warp itself breathed through it. Upon that throne sat Horus, the sun who had turned his love to hate, the brightest star fallen into the abyss. He was terrible to behold. His armor, once gleaming silver and white, now burned with shifting color, gold and black, blood red and void dark, symbols of all four gods flickering across its surface. Where his skin showed through broken plates, it was carved with runes that writhed like living scars. His right eye burned with warp fire. The left wept black tears that hissed as they struck the ground. Around him gathered a corona of shadow and light, the physical manifestation of chaos united, a storm given sentience. Behind him, the warp bled into reality. Shapes moved within it, wings, claws, eyes the size of planets opening and closing in reverence. The very air trembled with his power. The War Master's breath stirred the storm. His heartbeat echoed through the chamber like the pulse of a god. And yet, there was still something human within him. Beneath the corruption, beneath the divine hatred, Sanguinius sensed it, a fragment of the brother he had known, the warrior who had once laughed beneath the sons of Eleanor, who had sworn to defend the Emperor with his life. That spark flickered faintly, imprisoned behind layers of darkness. The angel advanced. Each step left behind a trail of blood and light, his wings unfolding despite their wounds. The floor cracked beneath his boots. The air shimmered with psychic force. Behind him, invisible winds rose, carrying whispers, the voices of the dead, his sons calling from the abyss. Their devotion bound him like armor, their sacrifice his shield. He stopped at the foot of the dais. Above him, Horus loomed like a dark sun, his aura pressing down with the weight of mountains. The angel looked up, and though no words were spoken, the chamber resonated with their unspoken histories: love, betrayal, destiny. For a long moment, nothing moved. Then the world screamed. The storm broke. Reality shattered as the psychic forces of two demigods collided.
The chamber became a crucible, gold clashing against black, light devouring shadow only to be devoured in turn. The very atoms of the ship trembled under the strain. Sanguinius rose into the air, wings blazing with holy fire. The remnants of his armor gleamed like the sun breaking through a bloodstorm. He struck downward, his blade a streak of incandescent gold. Horus met him with his talon, the claw of the War Master, each finger tipped with the power of annihilation. When they met, the impact sent ripples through space, bending light, cracking stone, erasing sound. The first exchange was apocalyptic. No mortal eyes could have followed it. Golden fire clashed with black lightning. The echoes of their battle rolled across the ship, through the warp, into the dreams of mortals light years away. Sanguinius fought like a dying star, each strike an act of faith, each motion a hymn of defiance. Yet Horus was the storm, infinite, unrelenting, his strength fed by gods that hungered for this moment. The angel's sword bit through armor and flesh, but the wounds closed almost instantly, devoured by shadow. The War Master's blow shattered ceramite and bone, his power shaking the heavens. The chamber became a living apocalypse. Pillars collapsed, blood rained from the ceiling in torrents, demons burst from the floor, only to be annihilated by the stray force of their master's fury. The warp screamed in ecstasy, feeding on their hatred. Still, Sanguinius endured. Every wound bled light, every heartbeat carried a fragment of the Emperor's will. His sword sang, cutting through the storm, leaving trails of brilliance that burned away corruption. Yet the red thirst, ever waiting, stirred beneath his resolve. Each drop of blood spilled called to it. Each breath drawn fanned its hunger, and Horus felt it. The War Master's laughter echoed through the chamber, silent yet deafening. He struck again and again, forcing the angel back, step by step. With every impact, the thirst grew stronger, the beast within clawing at its cage. Visions flooded Sanguinius's mind, of feeding, of surrendering, of becoming something greater and terrible. He fell to one knee. The storm closed in. Lightning carved patterns across his wings. Fire scorched his golden hair to ash. His sword trembled in his grip. The red thirst roared, promising salvation through blood. For a heartbeat, the angel faltered. Then came the memory, not of glory, but of peace. He saw the children of Baal looking up at him with eyes full of hope. He saw his father's legion kneeling, not in worship, but in love. He saw his father's dream, flawed, distant, yet still beautiful. And in that vision, he found clarity. The red thirst screamed as he cast it aside. He rose once more, his body broken, but his spirit aflame. The wings behind him flared, pure gold once again. His sword, cracked and dim, blazed with renewed light. Every motion became slow, deliberate, divine. He struck once. The blade pierced the War Master's chest, driving through armor, flesh, and shadow alike. The chamber erupted in radiance. The warp recoiled, screaming. The gods shrieked in fury, their unity fracturing for the briefest instant. Horus staggered. For the first time since the heresy began, the storm around him flickered. Beneath the mask of darkness, the man he had once been looked back, weary, sorrowful, almost grateful. His hand reached out, trembling as though to touch his brother's face. But the darkness would not allow it. The power of chaos surged, consuming him anew. He struck back, his talon tearing through Sanguinius's chest. The angel's wings froze mid-beat. The light around him dimmed. Blood, bright as dawn, scattered across the throne, burning as it touched the ground. The world fell silent. For a moment, the two stood locked together, brother against brother, angel against fallen star. Then the light faded from Sanguinius's eyes. His wings sagged. The sword slipped from his grasp. He fell, slow and silent, as though the universe itself mourned his descent. He struck the ground at the foot of the throne. The impact sent a single shockwave across the chamber, scattering the last of the demons into smoke. His blood pooled across the cracked marble, flowing toward the throne, staining it forever. Above him, Horus stood unmoving. The wound in his chest still burned, golden fire eating through the corruption. He looked down, and for the first time since the heresy began, the War Master's gaze softened. Something human flickered in those abysmal eyes. Recognition, regret, perhaps even love. But the god screamed louder. The fire faded, the shadow reclaimed him, and the man who had once been Horus turned away, leaving the angel's body bathed in dying light. The chamber dimmed, the echoes of battle faded. Only the heartbeat of the ship remained, slow, heavy, eternal. And upon the blackened floor of the War Master's throne room, the blood of an angel continued to glow, defying darkness, whispering of hope that even death could not silence.
The vengeful spirit was alive, its halls pulsed with an unnatural rhythm, a heartbeat not mechanical but sentient, sensing the approach of the Primarch. Each corridor stretched impossibly, bending light and shadow, twisting around itself like the coils of a serpent, alive with memory and malice. Sanguinius moved through the ship, and with every step the very structure quaked. The red thirst, dormant for centuries beneath the veneer of discipline and honor, roared awake, clawing at the walls of his mind with talons of fire. Its voice was sweet and terrible, promising power, dominion, transcendence, and it demanded release. The air itself had become thick with iron and ozone, with the scent of blood and smoke and the tang of warp energy. Panels of ceramite and steel flexed unnaturally as he passed, veins of power and flesh snaking along the walls and ceiling. The ship whispered to him in a language older than mortals or angels, a language of anticipation, of knowing that its corridors would soon run red with blood. Every step Sanguinius took left streaks of light and shadow on the floors, traces of his aura spreading outward, marking him as something no longer merely mortal, no longer merely angel, no longer merely Primarch. The surviving blood angels behind him dared not follow. Their bolters shook in hands that never wavered before, their hearts hammering as if trying to flee their own chests. They caught glimpses of the form behind them, wings blackened at the edges but glowing golden at the core, eyes that burned like twin stars in the void. They watched him step through walls and corridors that should have contained him, watched him pass through rivers of warp fire that should have consumed him, watched the air itself bend around him as if the universe itself bowed to his coming. From the shadows emerged the first wave of demonic guardians, grotesque beings twisted by chaos into shapes that should not exist, arms of jagged metal, fangs of impossibly long curve, eyes filled with the hatred of millennia. They charged, a tide of claws, teeth, and warp corruption. But Sanguinius did not falter. He met them with the precision of a predator and the fury of a god scorned. Each swing of his talons was a tempest, each slash of his blade a burst of holy fire that shredded armor, tore through flesh and unmade souls. The demons screamed as their forms disintegrated, their essence devoured by the psychic storm radiating from him. The red thirst sang in his mind, a chorus of hunger and divine purpose, urging him to consume, to dominate, to transcend.
Every corpse he passed nourished the hunger, each death a note in the symphony of his power. The corridors themselves reacted, walls bulging and bending, ceilings twisting and stretching, floors cracking open to reveal chasms of flame and shadow, streams of warp energy spilling upward like rivers of fire. Pillars of bone and steel twisted, and in the spaces between, echoes of the fallen whispered their approval or their terror. Every motion, every heartbeat, every gust of air carried the weight of inevitability. Sanguinius would reach the throne, and when he did, the universe itself would bend to the consequence of his hunger. The red thirst no longer whispered, it sang. Its voice was a roar that shook the ship to its foundations, resonating in his bones, harmonizing with the pulse of his wings, filling the spaces of his mind with visions of blood, fire, and power. He felt the souls of his sons, the ghosts of the fallen, the cries of Horus, the malice of the chaos gods, all woven into a tapestry of destiny that only he could walk. He embraced it, letting it flow through him, through every sinew, every feather, every heartbeat. He had become more than angel, more than primarch, more than man. He was a storm of hunger, a god in motion, a harbinger of blood and wrath. Finally, the antechamber before the throne stretched into view. The air was thick, vibrating with psychic tension, layered with the screams of the dead, the cries of demons, the whispers of the warp. The red thirst roared with anticipation. His wings stretched fully, claws extended, eyes blazing like suns soaked in crimson light. The corridors that led to the throne had become rivers of blood and warp fire, walls twisted into grotesque arches, ceilings torn open to reveal glimpses of stars beyond. Even the shadows trembled in the presence of the Angel of Blood. The first glimpse of Horus from the threshold sent a ripple through the ship. Swollen with the gifts of the Four, the War Master radiated power, malice, and corruption. Yet even he recoiled at the presence before him, sensing the alien hunger, the force beyond chaos, beyond mortal or divine comprehension. Sanguinius did not hesitate, wings beating, fangs glinting, aura ablaze with golden and crimson fire. He surged forward, the air splitting around him, reality bending to his will, the red thirst exulting in the inevitability of what was to come. The first part of his journey was complete. The corridors, the demons, the ship itself, all had been a crucible, shaping him into something new, something terrible, something beyond comprehension. He had become the Angel of Blood, the Predator, the Harbinger, the Storm. And beyond the antechamber lay the throne room, where destiny awaited him.
The threshold of the throne room trembled beneath Sanguinius's feet, each step sending shock waves through the warped corridors of the vengeful spirit. The air was thick with the weight of fate itself. Blood, fire, and warp energy swirled together in impossible patterns, coiling and uncoiling like serpents in anticipation. Every surface shimmered, reflecting not just light, but the psychic echoes of countless dead and dying. The red thirst, which had guided him through the corridors, now sang in full chorus, a roaring storm of hunger and exultation that demanded release. It had become impossible to separate the angel from the hunger, the primarch from the storm, the man from the god. Horus waited. The War Master stood amidst the heart of the throne, swollen with the gifts of the Four, eyes blazing with malice, wings of shadow and corruption unfurling like a storm cloud. The floor beneath him cracked and split, filaments of warp energy crawling across the mosaic like living veins. The demonic host that had not been destroyed by his passage was quivering in psychic fear. Even the chaos gods recoiled, sensing a force beyond their influence, something alien, something unclaimed, something terrifying. Sanguinius did not hesitate.
Wings spread wide, feathers blackened at the edges but ignited with the golden fire of divinity, fangs bared, talons gleaming with a light that pierced the shadows, he surged forward. Every movement carried the weight of centuries of war, the pain of thousands of fallen sons, the fury of a Primarch betrayed and abandoned. The air itself split as he descended, the sound of his wings cutting through space like blades. Their clash was not of men, nor merely of gods, but of forces that shaped reality itself. Talon met claw, blade met armor, psychic fire collided with warp corruption. Each strike tore through the throne room, sending shards of stone, bone, and energy spinning across the chamber. The demonic host that had not been destroyed by his passage was obliterated in a storm of blood and light, screams echoing across the stars, feeding the red thirst. Rivers of blood rose, defying gravity, flowing in spirals around the combatants, while fire and psychic energy burned in arcs across the walls. Sanguinius moved faster than thought. Each beat of his wings sent shock waves that shattered reality. Each swing of his talons shredded space and time. The red thirst roared in triumph, filling his mind with visions of every death, every scream, every act of betrayal that had led him here. Yet amid the fury, a clarity emerged. He was no longer bound by the moralities of man, no longer constrained by the codes of honor, no longer just an angel. He had become something beyond, a predator, a god, a storm incarnate. Horus struck back, wielding the powers of the Four, his blows tearing at the angel's flesh and armor, yet each attack only fueled the red thirst. Sanguinius's wounds healed almost instantly, seared shut by a combination of psychic energy and the consuming hunger that burned within him. He howled, a sound that reverberated through the warp, and with every scream his aura expanded, enveloping the throne room in an oppressive radiance. Even the walls of the ship bent slightly, warping under the weight of his divinity.
Then came the moment of surrender, not by will, but by inevitability. The red thirst surged to the surface, and Sanguinius gave in. His halo shattered into shards of crimson fire, wings darkened fully, feathers igniting with black and red light. His body twisted, elongated, reshaped by the hunger, the psychic fire, the warp essence he now fully embraced. He became something monstrous, yet magnificent, the angel of blood incarnate. Horus barely had time to register the change before Sanguinius descended. Fangs sank into flesh and warp, consuming life, essence, and power in a single, horrific act. Horus screamed, a sound that shattered the throne room, reverberated into the warp, and echoed across the stars. The Chaos Gods recoiled in disbelief as their favored champion's soul was drained completely, leaving nothing but an empty shell. For the first time, a being blessed by the gods of chaos truly died, consumed by an entity born of purity, twisted by hunger. The chamber convulsed violently. Ceilings collapsed, walls twisted, floors split into rivers of fire and blood. Demons caught in the psychic shockwave of Sanguinius's feeding disintegrated, shrieking as their essence was absorbed. Rivers of crimson and warp energy coalesced around him, feeding the red thirst, empowering it, yet never quenching it. He had become both predator and storm, feeding on the very essence of a god, unchallenged, unstoppable. Sanguinius rose, wings outstretched, body blazing with golden and crimson fire. The throne room, the vengeful spirit itself, and even the stars beyond seemed to bend to the aura of the angel of blood. Every sound, every vibration, every flicker of light resonated with the birth of something new, the first sparks of the crimson god. The universe held its breath. The red thirst did not fade.
It remained a constant pulse beneath his chest, a reminder that this power was eternal, insatiable, and relentless. Yet with it came clarity, the understanding of his purpose, the knowledge that he had transcended mortal, angelic, and primarch limitations. He was now a force of reckoning, a being whose presence would reshape humanity, the Imperium, and even the warp itself. He paused above the shattered throne of Horus, the corpse of the War Master a hollow shell beneath him. The rivers of blood and warp fire swirled around, reflecting his new form in fractal echoes. He was alone, yet he carried the weight of every death, every victory, every betrayal. The red thirst whispered not for feeding now, but for dominion. The angel of blood had risen. The first whispers of worship began. Across the galaxy, in dreams and visions, in hearts and minds, mortals and blood angels alike would feel his presence. The legends would speak of the angel who consumed a god, who rose beyond death and corruption, who embodied wrath, purity, and hunger. And in that moment, the universe knew. Sanguinius had crossed the threshold of mortality, had devoured a god, and had become something new. A predator, a god, a storm, the Crimson Angel. The throne room fell silent, except for the low hum of warp and blood energy, the whispers of the dead, and the ever-present pulse of the red thirst. The angel of blood had ascended. The universe would never forget.
The vengeful spirit shuddered violently as a new presence tore through the warp, arriving in the very heart of its corrupted corridors. The Emperor had come. Light beyond comprehension flooded the corridors, golden and white, yet cold and distant, radiating power so immense it made reality itself groan under its weight. Sanguinius paused, wings quivering, talons brushing the warped floor. His heart, already consumed by the red thirst, throbbed with a new sensation: awe, terror, guilt, and the faint echo of love for the father who had molded him, guided him, and now confronted him. The angel of blood turned slowly, the crimson and gold aura surrounding him crackling with raw psychic energy. The ship quaked under the presence of two divine wills. Walls bent and twisted, filaments of warp energy screamed, and the air itself shimmered with the collision of potential annihilation. The red thirst whispered eagerly, urging him to act, to feed, to dominate. But the sight of the Emperor, perfect and terrible, ignited a strange, almost human hesitation. The Emperor stepped into the chamber, a figure of light and majesty, yet his expression betrayed infinite grief. Every line of his immortal face, every curve of his golden armor, radiated sorrow and pain. He had expected Horus, his traitorous son, and instead he saw the impossible. His own son, transformed, half divine, half predator, a force that had consumed a god and now radiated hunger unlike any being in the galaxy. Reality bent around them. Time slowed. Sanguinius's wings beat slowly, each motion tearing through space and creating trails of fire and shadow. The ship responded violently, walls bending, floors splitting, warp veins glowing in wild patterns. Even the stars outside the void seemed to shimmer with recognition of the confrontation unfolding within the heart of the vengeful spirit. The Emperor's voice, though calm, carried across the corridors like a tidal wave, resonating with the psychic hum of Sanguinius's form. He did not shout, he did not command, he merely spoke, and the words carried weight beyond mortal comprehension. Sanguinius trembled, not out of fear,
but from the overwhelming awareness of his father's might and grief. The red thirst screamed in protest, clawing at his mind. Hunger and instinct urged him to strike, to consume, to dominate. But there was hesitation. Every fiber of his being knew that this was no ordinary battle. He was no longer merely the angel of blood. He was a storm incarnate, and the Emperor's presence challenged that storm in ways nothing else ever had. The corridors of the vengeful spirit convulsed, breaking apart under the psychic resonance of two godlike presences. Ceilings warped into impossible arches, floors cracked into rivers of fire and blood, walls dissolved into liquid light and shadow. The demonic remnants, those that had survived his previous slaughter, screamed and fled, sensing a force beyond even the grasp of chaos. The air was thick with static, the smell of blood and ozone mingling with a scent of divine inevitability. Sanguinius stepped forward, talons scraping the warped floor. His wings stretched wide, feathers blackened at the edges but ablaze at the core, catching and refracting the light of the Emperor's presence. His body trembled, not from weakness, but from the intensity of the psychic and physical energies that pulsed through him. The red thirst still roared, but there was a new voice now. The silent, unwavering will of the Emperor, challenging, judging, and yet mourning. The Emperor raised his hand and the chamber responded instantly. Rivers of light shot forth, intersecting with the currents of blood and warp energy that clung to Sanguinius's form. Each pulse of light was a reminder of the vastness of the Emperor's power, a power that could obliterate worlds, bend reality, and unravel the warp. But Sanguinius did not fall. He stood tall, wings extended, aura blazing. The red thirst now tempered by focus, sharpened by intent. He was no longer a son pleading for guidance. He was a god-born predator, tempered and aware. Their psychic presence clashed subtly at first, a hum that vibrated in the bones of the ship, reverberating across the warp. Sanguinius felt every heartbeat of the Emperor, every breath, every thought. And in return, the Emperor felt the red thirst, the hungers, the monstrous transformation of the son he loved and mourned. The air itself seemed to vibrate with the psychic resonance, sending ripples across reality. Corridors split open to reveal glimpses of infinity. Walls bent and twisted, warp filaments writhed like snakes. Sanguinius took another step, and the ship screamed. The vengeful spirit convulsed violently, corridors folding over themselves, ceilings stretching into impossible angles, floors cracking into rivers of fire and blood. The red thirst pulsed, screaming to be unleashed, yet Sanguinius forced it into focus, shaping it, controlling it, blending it with the awe and grief he felt in the presence of the Emperor. He realized he had become something new, something neither wholly angel nor wholly man, a predator capable of challenging even a god in mortal form. The Emperor raised both hands, and the entire chamber became a prism of divine light. Shadows and blood twisted together, forming fractal patterns across the walls and floors. Sanguinius's aura flared in response, golden and crimson fire clashing with pure, radiant light. The collision created a psychic resonance so intense that the demonic remnants, the warp currents, and even the vengeful spirit itself seemed to bend under the weight of their confrontation. Sanguinius hesitated, tasting the power in the chamber, feeling the weight of everything he had done, everything he had become, and the vast gulf of sorrow in the Emperor's gaze. For the first time, the red thirst was still, replaced by an almost unbearable clarity. He was predator, angel, son, god, and now he faced the being who had created him, who had loved him, and who now must judge him. And then, without a word, the Emperor advanced, not with hatred, not with malice, but with the unstoppable inevitability of divine authority. The corridors screamed in protest, the ship quaked, and the stars outside twinkled as though witnessing an event that would echo across millennia. Sanguinius braced, wings fully extended, aura blazing, ready to meet the force of his father's wrath and love. The vengeful spirit had become a crucible, a forge for the inevitable confrontation, and the first strike was about to fall.
The chamber erupted. The moment Sanguinius and the Emperor collided, reality itself tore at the edges. Light and shadow clashed with a force beyond comprehension. The Emperor's radiant aura, a blinding lattice of golden light, collided with the crimson-gold inferno of the Angel of Blood. The clash was silent to mortals, yet it resonated across the warp like a symphony of stars breaking. Every wall of the vengeful spirit splintered, ceilings folded, floors split into rivers of fire, and fragments of the throne room were torn into alternate dimensions, suspended in a liminal void between creation and destruction. Sanguinius moved with lethal grace, talons and wings slicing through currents of golden light. His body had become a nexus of the red thirst, a storm of psychic and corporeal hunger. Every strike carried centuries of anger, grief, and betrayal, a weight that the Emperor felt in his chest and mind with each connection. Sparks of warp and divine energy cascaded across the chamber, lighting the air with the screams of the dead, whispers of the warp, and echoes of eternity. The Emperor countered, a tidal wave of authority and psychic might. Each motion was perfection incarnate, calculated yet infinitely expansive. He did not merely strike, he rearranged the currents of energy, bending the red thirst back against itself, attempting to tether Sanguinius's monstrous hunger to a sliver of restraint. The angel roared in response, wings flaring, aura burning hotter than stars, and yet the Emperor held, absorbing and reflecting, a master of subtle omnipotence. Their psychic and physical battle tore through corridors beyond sight. Fractures appeared in the ship that revealed glimpses of the galaxy itself, stars blinking as if in warning. The warp trembled, currents twisting violently, demonic and mortal energies alike reacting with terror and awe. The red thirst, pulsing in Sanguinius's chest, surged with every psychic blow, urging him to feed, to destroy, to claim dominion over even the Emperor's divine will. Yet he was tempered, aware of the stakes, conscious of the son confronting his father, and the father confronting a god-born predator who had once been his perfect son. Blows met blows, talons struck light, fangs clashed against divine radiance, wings of fire beat against walls of immaterial energy. The throne room had become a vortex, a crucible of blood, fire, and psychic resonance. Fragments of reality twisted in impossible angles. Rivers of blood and warp energy rose to meet the collision of divine wills. Sanguinius could taste the essence of the universe, every death, every life, every star burning with potential and inevitability. The red thirst sang, no longer merely hunger, but jubilation, exulting in the creation of something new, something unprecedented. The Emperor, unyielding, struck with hands that carried the weight of millennia. Waves of golden energy crashed against the crimson angel, shaking his very form. Yet Sanguinius absorbed, reflected, and redirected, feeding the red thirst through controlled motion, shaping his hunger into weaponized divinity. He was predator, predator of gods, predator of reality itself. His aura radiated outward, bending light, blood, and psychic essence into patterns that tore at the fabric of the vengeful spirit, the warp,
and even the distant stars. Time fractured. Moments became eternities. Eternities became instants. Sanguinius's mind reached further into the warp, touching its currents, bending them around him, pulling fragments of Horus's consumed essence into his aura. The red thirst had become a symphony of devouring, a tapestry of power and hunger that now rivaled the Emperor's own will. Every heartbeat, every breath, every movement became both attack and defense, a swirling storm that consumed the chamber, the ship, and reality itself. The Emperor's sorrow and grief radiated outward, an invisible counterforce to the red thirst, binding it, challenging it, testing the limits of what Sanguinius had become. The angel faltered for a heartbeat, tasting not hunger, but remorse. And in that fleeting instant, the universe seemed to hang in perfect, impossible balance. Yet the hunger returned, roaring, more focused, more terrible than ever, twisting his aura into a storm of blood and gold, reshaping every particle of the throne room, bending even the warp itself to his presence. He struck again. Talons tore at the Emperor's armor. Fangs clashed against divine radiance. Wings unfurled with unstoppable force. The chamber shook, warping in impossible angles. Pieces of reality ripped and twisted. Fragments of time looping endlessly. Echoes of infinity reverberating in each psychic pulse. The Emperor responded with waves of light so pure and dense they seemed to consume space itself. Yet the angel's hunger could not be fully quelled. It surged, fed by necessity, sharkened by will, a predator achieving apex power. For hours, minutes, and seconds, time fractured beyond reckoning. The battle raged. Rivers of blood and warped fire spiraled outward. Streams of psychic energy collided, creating explosions of light and sound that echoed across the galaxy and into the warp itself. Sanguinius's form expanded further, becoming more monstrous, more divine, more predator than angel. His red thirst now radiated outward, touching the very fabric of the vengeful spirit, bending the ship and reality to his being. And then came the moment of stasis. Both beings, father and son, predator and god, angel and emperor, paused in mutual recognition. The chamber settled into a temporary calm, though the air still quivered with raw power. Sanguinius hovered, wings outstretched, aura blazing with gold and crimson, body trembling with energy and hunger. The Emperor regarded him, sorrow and resolve shining in every gesture, aware that this confrontation would shape the fate of the galaxy. The red thirst whispered, insistent and eternal, yet Sanguinius restrained it, acknowledging the weight of his father's gaze, the consequences of his hunger, and the inevitability of his own evolution. He was no longer simply Primarch. He was the Crimson Angel, predator of gods, predator of Horus, storm incarnate, and soon he would transcend even this moment, rising fully into his divine destiny. The stars outside trembled, the warp screamed, chaos roared and recoiled, the galaxy held its breath, and the confrontation had only just begun.
Silence fell across the vengeful spirit, though it was not true silence. The air vibrated with lingering waves of psychic energy, the echoes of two godlike wills colliding in ways that defied mortal comprehension. The chamber was a ruin, yet even in destruction, it radiated significance. The remnants of walls scorched and twisted, the floors cracked in bleeding streams of warp-infused blood, fragments of reality suspended mid-air like frozen memories of an impossible battle.
Sanguinius hovered at the center, wings outstretched, body glowing with crimson gold fire, talons and fangs still gleaming with the power he had devoured from Horus. Yet the red thirst still pulsed inside him, eternal and unyielding. The Emperor had withdrawn slightly, retreating into the raw brilliance of his divine presence, yet he remained vigilant. His gaze, filled with infinite sorrow and determination, weighed upon Sanguinius. He saw the transformation, the evolution, the inevitable birth of something neither wholly chaos nor wholly order, something alien, something entirely new. In the brief pause between attacks, the Primarch, now more than a Primarch, realized that his existence had shifted beyond the parameters of the galaxy. He was no longer just Sanguinius, the angel, the son of the Emperor. He was predator, god, and hunger incarnate. He was the beginning of a new pantheon yet unborn. From the center of his being, the red thirst no longer merely demanded feeding. It sang, harmonized with the warp, intertwined with the blood of the galaxy itself. Every star, every planet, every human soul vibrated in response. Across the Imperium, subtle tremors echoed, whispers, shivers, and dreams imbued with visions of red-gold wings and a voice that carried authority beyond the Emperor himself. Sanguinius's consciousness stretched into the warp, his perception extending across light years, threading through the currents of chaos, touching fragments of existence previously inaccessible. The birth of the Crimson God was not sudden. It was a slow, painful flowering of power, hunger, divinity, and conscience, each layer folding into the other. The red thirst reshaped him, his flesh glowing with veins of energy, wings expanding beyond their natural span, feathers igniting into a kaleidoscope of fire and shadow. Psychic currents erupted from him in waves that shattered nearby stars' perceptions, rupturing the fragile barrier between material and immaterial. Daemons and warp entities across the system paused, sensing a presence that neither feared nor obeyed them. The Crimson God did not belong to the Chaos Pantheon, nor to the Emperor's hierarchy, nor to mortal or immortal law. It simply existed, absolute, unchallenged, and consuming.
Sanguinius's mind expanded. He remembered the faces of his sons, the cries of terror, the screams of Horus, the years of secrecy and discipline that had delayed the red thirst's awakening. He integrated them all, shaping the raw psychic energy into a coherent, clarifying form of divinity. From his core radiated judgment, wrath, compassion, and hunger, each pulse reshaping reality in subtle, undetectable ways at first, then increasingly obvious as the warp itself began to bend toward his will. The Emperor's presence remained a constant counterbalance, light against bloodfire. He attempted to shield the galaxy, to temper the storm of Sanguinius's newfound divinity, yet even he could not contain the expansion of the Crimson God. Reality buckled under their combined presence. The vengeful spirit, already a vessel of death and corruption, twisted further, becoming simultaneously cathedral, tomb, and celestial forge. The very corridors that had once been demonic highways now shimmered with divine purpose, echoing with the birth cries of a god. The first acknowledgement of the Crimson God's full emergence was subtle. Across the galaxy, the blood angels stirred. Sleepers dreamt vividly, as if touched by a whisper of divine presence. Minds fractured and reformed in understanding of a new power. Planets vibrated subtly, as though sensing a new axis of divinity had been placed into the cosmos.
and in the warp, currents twisted violently. Even Khorne, in his throne of blood and fury, recoiled instinctively. This new entity, born from the combination of angelic purity, the hunger of the red thirst, and the devouring of Horus's essence, was outside his dominion. It was neither subject to chaos nor loyal to order. It existed solely to enforce its will, tempered by the remnants of conscience and the memory of its sonhood. Sanguinius, now fully aware of his new state, began to shape his power, stretching tendrils of psychic fire and blood energy into the corridors and beyond. He touched the minds of his sons, feeding them visions of hope and terror, teaching them simultaneously to fear and revere. His hunger, though satiated by Horus's essence, demanded further growth, further understanding. Every heartbeat radiated power. Every breath was a pulse of potential creation or destruction. The Emperor stepped closer, recognizing the inevitability. Words were unnecessary now. The clash had transcended speech. Energy clashed in a kaleidoscope of red-gold fire against blinding light. Streams of psychic and corporeal force bending space around them. The air quaked, the warp roared, and the stars beyond Terra flickered as if winking in fearful recognition. Sanguinius reached out, not with malice, but with authority. His wings spread wider than ever, feathers slicing the light, casting shadows that burned the air like fire. His aura expanded in all directions, forming a protective sphere that held fragments of reality together, yet allowed the full weight of his power to manifest. The red thirst sang now in harmony with his will, a symphony of hunger, rage, and divine purpose. The transformation was complete. Across the Imperium, subtle changes began. Cults whispered to one another, dreams of a winged figure with eyes of fire shaping loyalties and inspiring fear. Blood angels across the galaxy felt a shift within themselves. The red thirst, once a curse, now tempered with purpose, guiding them as never before. Even the fabric of the warp quivered, recognizing a new axis of divinity. The Crimson God hovered above the ruins of the throne room, wings outstretched, body blazing with power, eyes burning with comprehension of his new dominion. The red thirst pulsed like a second heartbeat, feeding on the memory of Horus, the sorrow of the Emperor, and the endless potential of the galaxy. This was not merely the Primarch returned or transformed, it was a presence beyond precedent. A new god whose existence would shape the cosmos, warp, and Imperium alike. And yet, in the midst of triumph, there was a subtle note of sorrow. Sanguinius, even as the Crimson God, retained the memory of his father, his sons, and his mortality. The red thirst, now fully harmonized with consciousness, whispered endlessly, reminding him of the cost of his ascension, the eternity of his hunger, and the impossible balance he must now maintain. The first tremors of recognition spread outward. Chaos recoiled, daemons fled or cowered. Mortal beings across the galaxy felt the shift in subtle, inexplicable ways. The vengeful spirit itself became a cathedral of the new god, its corridors now sanctified and corrupted simultaneously, a fitting monument to a power born of purity, wrath, and insatiable hunger. The universe had changed. The Crimson God had been born. And this was only the beginning.
The universe trembled in silent acknowledgement. Where once the galaxy had followed a fragile order of Imperium and chaos, a new axis of divinity now emerged, radiant and terrifying. Sanguinius, the Crimson God, hovered above the wreckage of the vengeful spirit,
wings unfurling like blazing banners of judgment and blood. Every feather burned with fire and shadow, every beat reverberating across light years, shaking worlds with its resonance. The red thirst no longer whispered, it sang, a crier of hunger harmonized with divine purpose, a power that neither mortal nor God had ever witnessed. From the corridors of the ship to the distant stars, reality quivered. Warp currents twisted in response to the presence of a god born of blood, vengeance, and love. Daemons, previously unchallenged in their dominion, fled or cowered, recoiling from a predator whose hunger had been tempered with purpose. The Chaos Gods felt it immediately. Khorne, seated upon his throne of blood, roared in fury, an eruption of psychic and emotional force that reverberated into the material universe. Even the mighty Lord of Change, Tzeentch, paused, his plans disrupted by a presence that defied prediction. Slaanesh's whispers faltered, and Nurgle's plagues recoiled in the face of purity corrupted, yet perfect. Sanguinius extended his consciousness, the Crimson God's awareness stretching like threads across the stars. He touched the minds of his sons, his legion, and even the loyal servants of the Imperium. The blood angels across the galaxy stirred in unison. Dreams became visions, nightmares transformed into guidance. The red thirst, once a curse that had haunted their bloodline for millennia, now resonated with divine purpose. They awoke not merely as warriors, but as disciples of the Crimson God, vessels of his wrath and guardians of his will. The Emperor watched, a silent observer now, his grief tempered with awe. He saw what had become of his son, what had risen from blood, hunger, and the slaughter of Horus. He realized that the universe had shifted irreversibly. This was no longer simply a battle between father and son. It was the emergence of a god who would forever alter the balance between order, chaos, and humanity. The Emperor's own light pulsed, struggling to maintain equilibrium. Yet even he could not contain the storm that had been unleashed. Across Terra, subtle tremors echoed. Ecclesiarchs, once confident in the singular authority of the Emperor, began to receive visions of a winged figure, eyes aflame with cosmic judgment. Rumors spread, whispered in hushed runes, of a god who fed upon the corrupt, who wept for the innocent, and who demanded loyalty not through fear, but through awe and devotion. Blood angels particularly felt their veins pulse with renewed vigor, their instincts guided by the presence of the Crimson God. Where once they had struggled against the red thirst, now they embraced it, understanding it as a gift and a tool of divine purpose.
Sanguinius's gaze stretched outward, touching every corner of the galaxy simultaneously. Systems in revolt, war zones filled with chaos cults, demon incursions, and traitor legions all felt the presence of a new god. Some fled in terror, some fell to their knees in devotion, and some resisted, only to be reminded instantly of their mortality. The universe itself seemed to bow, aware that a predator of gods now roamed freely, a force unchallenged by the Chaos Pantheon or by mortal decree. The red thirst, harmonized with purpose, pulsed with every heartbeat of the galaxy. Sanguinius's feeding on Horus had not been merely an act of vengeance, it had been the catalyst for this transformation. The essence of chaos, devoured and reshaped within him, had been purified through hunger and tempered by conscience. He was both predator and protector, angel and god, wrath incarnate and shepherd of mankind. The stars themselves began to resonate with his presence. Nova bursts aligned with the rhythm of his wings, galaxies subtly bending as if reality acknowledged a new axis of divinity. Even the warp, chaotic and ever-shifting, was drawn into the orbit of the Crimson God, twisted yet stabilized by his will. Demons who dared approach were consumed or repelled. Loyalist sons of the Imperium were emboldened, their psychic and physical prowess magnified by the divine resonance. The Emperor remained near the remnants of the vengeful spirit, his aura a counterbalance, yet he understood that direct conflict was now unnecessary. Sanguinius had ascended beyond confrontation. He had become the new fulcrum of humanity's destiny. The red thirst, once feared, was now the essence of divine judgment, guiding the blood angels and influencing the galaxy in ways both subtle and cataclysmic. With each beat of his wings, the Crimson God's influence expanded. Planets across the Imperium felt his presence, not through destruction, but through awe, inspiration, and subtle psychic nudges. Battles that had been lost now found strange reversals. Traitor legions hesitated, demonic incursions faltered, and mortals caught glimpses of divine justice manifesting in real time. The galaxy was awakening to a new order, centered not on fear alone, but on the terrifying majesty of a god who had walked among mortals and transcended them. Sanguinius hovered over the vengeful spirit, crimson gold aura blazing, wings slicing through light, every movement radiating authority. His mind stretched outward, connecting to the warp, touching the echoes of Horus, of Terra, of humanity itself. He was aware of his father, of the universe, of the delicate balance between order and chaos, yet he felt no restraint, only purpose, only hunger guided by conscience, only the inevitability of his dominion. And in that dominion, the galaxy found new fear and new hope intertwined. The blood angels became avatars of the Crimson God's will. Loyalists felt their bloodline transform, harnessing the red thirst without surrendering to it, guided by visions and whispers of their godfather. Chaos entities recoiled at the first true predator of gods, their influence disrupted, their dominion questioned. The warp quaked, its currents bending to accommodate a new axis of power, a force neither chaos nor order, but born of blood, love, wrath, and hunger. The vengeful spirit itself became a cathedral to this ascension. Its corridors, once demonic, were now consecrated in a twisted, terrifying harmony of blood, warp, and divine fire. The red thirst echoed through every hall, every chamber, shaping the ship into a living monument to the new god. And from this locus, the Crimson God extended his presence, touching every corner of human space with awareness, judgment, and influence. The universe had shifted irreversibly. Where once the galaxy had known only the struggle between the Imperium, chaos, and mortals, now there was a fifth force, rising from blood, wrath, and divine purpose. The Crimson God had been born fully, his presence undeniable, eternal, and insatiable. And though his red thirst pulsed endlessly, demanding ever more, Sanguinius understood, in the quiet moments of omnipotence, the weight of his ascension. He had devoured a god, faced his father, and claimed a new dominion. Yet with this power came responsibility, and with responsibility came eternity. The stars trembled, the warp quaked, chaos reeled, humanity shivered in anticipation, and the Crimson God, predator and protector, angel and god, spread his wings across the galaxy, heralding a new age, the age of blood and light.
The galaxy trembled under a presence it could scarcely comprehend, The rise of the Crimson God had sent ripples across space and time, and nowhere was that more evident than among the Blood Angels. Their chapters, scattered across countless worlds, felt a shift within their blood, a resonance that intertwined the red thirst with purpose. Where once the curse had tormented, it now guided. The whispers of Sanguinius reached through dreams and meditations, instructing, warning, inspiring. On distant worlds, blood angels awoke with instincts sharpened beyond human comprehension. Leaders felt visions of distant battles, strategies that could turn hopeless engagements into decisive victories. Warriors found their senses heightened. Every motion, every strike, every thought became aligned with a purpose beyond mortal understanding. The red thirst, formerly a burden, now served as a tool of discipline and divine guidance. Yet for some, the sudden expansion of their Primarch's presence proved overwhelming. Their minds fractured under the intensity, creating a new breed of warrior, both protector and avatar of the Crimson God. Across the Imperium, the ecclesiarchy faced an unprecedented crisis. High priests and counselors witnessed visions of a winged figure whose eyes blazed with fire, whose presence demanded awe. Debates erupted in whispered tones and open chambers. Was Sanguinius truly a god? Could a son of the Emperor, who had long been confined to myth and legend, now claim divinity? Some deemed him a heresy, a dangerous rival to the Emperor's singular authority. Others, sensing the immense power radiating through the galaxy, declared him a necessary force, a protector beyond mortal constraints. Secret cults formed overnight, devoted to the Crimson God. Hushed chants filled the cathedrals of hive worlds, prayers and rituals interwoven with the red thirst, seeking guidance and favor. Meanwhile, planets on the edge of rebellion felt subtle but unmistakable guidance. Systems in revolt, once lost causes, now found themselves constrained by unseen hands, as if the universe itself had intervened. The Crimson God's presence reached them through psychic whispers, strategic premonitions, and occasionally terrifying visions of wrath and retribution. Armies realigned, fleets maneuvered with precision, and the tides of battle shifted before they even began. Those who resisted felt a gnawing, almost physical pull, as though the red thirst itself compelled obedience, blending fear with awe. In the warp, the situation grew even more extraordinary. Demons, accustomed to asserting influence freely, recoiled at the presence of a god born of blood, purpose, and hunger. Khorne's legions hesitated, their lust for slaughter restrained by a force neither mortal nor demonic. Tzeentch's manipulations faltered, his plots unraveling under the weight of foresight transmitted through the Crimson God's psychic reach. Even Slaanesh and Nurgle paused, sensing a presence outside their dominion, immune to fear and corruption alike. The warp itself twisted and adjusted, currents bending to accommodate a new axis of power, one that challenged the existing pantheon. Sanguinius, fully aware of his influence, observed from the remnant of the vengeful spirit. He extended his consciousness across systems, tempering his red thirst with the wisdom and conscience that had survived his transformation. Systems that had fallen to chaos were given visions, sometimes terrifying, sometimes inspiring, guiding them toward stability and discipline. The red thirst pulsed as a divine tool, a force of judgment, ensuring that the Blood Angels and the Imperium adapted to this new order. Amid these transformations, the Emperor remained on Terra, observing, grieving, and calculating. Though bound to the Golden Throne, his psychic presence spanned the Imperium, feeling the tremors of Sanguinius's influence. He realized that the universe had shifted irrevocably. The Crimson God was no longer a son or a Primarch. He was a sovereign force, a presence that challenged the balance of power across mortal and immortal realms alike. Yet the Emperor's sorrow tempered his action. He could not intervene directly without risking further disruption. The first signs of resistance appeared. Chaos cultists, traitor legions, and heretical factions recognized the danger of a new god whose motives were neither aligned with their own nor predictable. Across the stars, skirmishes erupted. Battles flared as mortals, demons, and traitors tested the reach of the Crimson God's influence, only to find themselves repelled by forces beyond comprehension. Ships burned or vanished in the void, armies faltered or realigned in inexplicable patterns, and demonic manifestations were disrupted, sometimes annihilated by unseen hands guided by the predator angel of humanity. The vengeful spirit became the epicenter of these changes, its corridors no longer merely a vessel, but a living cathedral of the Crimson God. The ship pulsed with psychic energy, the red thirst flowing through its hull, feeding back into Sanguinius's consciousness. Every corridor, every chamber, every vessel connected to it became a nexus of power, a testament to the new divinity. Those who entered felt their minds tested and reshaped, their instincts honed to align with the god they served or feared. And yet for all the expansion of his power, Sanguinius maintained vigilance. The red thirst whispered constantly, a reminder of hunger, predation, and responsibility. The galaxy stretched out before him, every corner under his influence, yet every heartbeat carried the weight of judgment. He was predator and protector, angel and god, hunger and conscience. The balance was delicate, and even in victory, he understood the risks.
The universe had begun to adapt. The age of blood and light had dawned, heralded by the rise of a god born of blood, vengeance, and purpose. The galaxy trembled, mortals, daemons, and gods alike acknowledging the presence of a new force, a predator angel whose dominion would shape the future of humanity and the cosmos itself.
The galaxy was no longer the same. Systems that had been loyal to the Imperium now trembled under the dual influence of the Emperor and the newly risen Crimson God. The echoes of Sanguinius's presence spread like a psychic wildfire, threading through the minds of warriors, governors, and civilians alike. Every heartbeat, every pulse of life resonated with the faint yet undeniable rhythm of the predator angel who had ascended beyond mortality. The Blood Angels became the first and most visible agents of this change, their actions guided by the divine whispers that flowed through their veins like liquid fire. On countless worlds, their martial presence reshaped the balance of power. Fortresses once besieged now held firm. Fleets once fractured moved with newfound precision, and entire planetary defenses restructured themselves intuitively. It was as though the Crimson God's mind had extended to every officer, soldier, and pilot within his reach, infusing them with strategy, foresight, and purpose beyond human comprehension. The red thirst, once a curse that had brought madness and despair, now pulsed with clarity and control, guiding his sons to acts of disciplined violence that seemed almost prophetic. Not all were ready for this awakening. Some Blood Angels, overwhelmed by the intensity of divine influence, fractured under the pressure. Minds that had resisted the red thirst were now torn between instinct and divine command. Entire chapters began to splinter internally, some embracing the godhood of Sanguinius fully, others attempting to cling to older traditions and doctrines. Yet even in resistance, they felt the subtle pull of their Primarch's will. Rebellion against the Crimson God was possible, but fleeting. His presence was too pervasive, too absolute, too intertwined with the very blood that flowed through them. Meanwhile, the Imperium at large began to shift. Planetary governors, high lords, and ecclesiastics felt the intangible tug of the Crimson God's influence. Some interpreted it as divine guidance, a miraculous presence protecting humanity in the Emperor's absence. Others saw it as heresy, a dangerous rival to the throne that had long been considered unchallenged. Secret cults grew overnight,
their adherents worshipping Sanguinius as a god of judgment, mercy, and wrath. On hive worlds, prayers were whispered in trembling voices, sacrifices offered, and entire populations drawn to the presence of the Crimson God through psychic resonance alone. The Emperor observed all from the Golden Throne, silent and sorrowful. His mind, though strained and battered, felt the waves of influence radiating across the Imperium. He realized that Sanguinius had become more than a son, more than a primarch. He was now a sovereign presence in the galaxy, reshaping reality itself according to a new and unknowable vision. The Emperor's grief was tempered with awe. He understood that direct confrontation was no longer the solution. The universe had been altered irreversibly, and the age that followed would bear the mark of the Crimson God. Chaos, too, began to react. Khorne's demonic horde struck out, attempting to reclaim lost influence, but the Predator God's presence disrupted their assaults. Demons were torn apart, their rituals undone, their dominion challenged by a force that neither feared nor obeyed them. Tzeentch's schemes, built over millennia, faltered when confronted with a presence that could predict and counter his manipulations. Nurgle's plagues failed to gain hold in worlds under the Crimson God's gaze, and Slaanesha's whispers faltered, offering no temptation to minds already touched by divine purpose. Even the warp itself twisted in reaction, currents bending toward the axis of power represented by Sanguinius, acknowledging him as a new fulcrum in the balance of all things. The vengeful spirit became more than a ship. It became a psychic cathedral, a living monument to the Crimson God's duality. Its corridors, once haunted by the whispers of demons and the echoes of Horus's power, now pulsed with the presence of the Predator Angel. Every deck and chamber resonated with the red thirst, infused with the divine will that now guided all who entered. Visitors, whether loyalist, heretic, or unsuspecting mortal, found themselves tested, reshaped, and sometimes broken by the intensity of his influence. Yet some emerged strengthened, their skills and awareness enhanced, bound forever to the will of the Crimson God.
Across the stars, battles erupted as systems struggled to adapt to this new reality. Planets loyal to chaos, previously secure in their autonomy, now fell under the subtle guidance of the Crimson God. Fleet movements became coordinated with preternatural foresight. Armies previously scattered and fractured reorganized, often without any direct command, aligning with the divine intent of their primarch, reborn as God. Even in regions distant from terror, his influence touched every corner, turning what might have been defeat into victory, despair into hope, and chaos into structure. Yet the red thirst remained insatiable. Though it now functioned as a tool of purpose, it still whispered, demanding attention, feeding on the psychic residue of battle, the energy of the warp, and the very blood of the galaxy. Sanguinius, now fully aware of the eternal hunger that defined him, had to balance his divine wrath with restraint. His guidance was not tyranny, but vigilance. He had become a shepherd, predator, and god, tasked with shaping humanity while containing the insatiable force within himself. The ecclesiarchy faced the most profound challenge of all. Some factions openly opposed the Crimson God, attempting to suppress worship, denounce him as heresy, or rally loyalty solely to the Emperor. Others accepted, even embraced the new presence, recognizing the pragmatic benefit of a divine protector and predator combined. Conflicts erupted not only in the physical realm, but in minds and spirits. Arguments over faith, allegiance, and divine authority threatened to fracture the Imperium further. Yet everywhere, the subtle hand of the Crimson God guided resolution.
Even chaos felt the shift on a cosmic scale. The pantheon of gods, accustomed to the unchallenged devotion of mortals and demons alike, reeled under the emergence of a new axis of power. Rituals faltered, cults splintered, and the presence of Sanguinius introduced unpredictability that had never existed before. Across the warp, currents that had flowed freely under the Chaos God's control were redirected, subtly, inexorably, into the orbit of the Crimson God. The Predator Angel had not only survived the crucible of Terra, but had reshaped the universe itself to acknowledge his dominion. And so the age of blood and light unfolded. The galaxy became a chessboard of divine influence, mortal will, and predatory purpose. Systems adapted to the presence of the Crimson God. Armies realigned, fleets maneuvered with uncanny precision, and the Red Thirst became a tool of unity, guidance, and judgment. The Blood Angels became the most visible agents of this new order, their actions extensions of a god who had once been a son, a warrior, and now an eternal force. Sanguinius observed all from the psychic cathedral of the Vengeful Spirit. His mind extended across stars, weaving subtle influence, correcting imbalance, nurturing order while preserving the freedom necessary to maintain the balance. He was predator and protector, god and angel, wrath and conscience. His dominion was absolute, yet tempered by purpose. The universe, having witnessed the death of Horus, the awakening of the Red Thirst, and the rise of the Crimson God, would never be the same. The galaxy shivered, trembled, and awakened. Mortals, demons, and gods alike recognized the new axis of power. The Blood Angels were no longer mere warriors. They were the avatars of a god whose presence shaped reality itself. Chaos faltered, the Imperium adapted, and the stars themselves bore witness to the rise of a predator angel who would define the age of blood and light for millennia to come. And in the quiet, across the void, the Red Thirst pulsed, eternal and insatiable, reminding all that even gods are bound by hunger, and that the predator always hungers. The galaxy quaked under the presence of the Crimson God. Systems that had once been stable trembled with the echoes of his power. The Blood Angels, transformed into avatars of divine purpose, swept across the Imperium, reorganizing defenses, subduing chaos, and confronting traitors and heretics alike. Every strike, every command, every psychic whisper resonated with the weight of a god who had risen from blood, fury, and sacrifice. Planets in rebellion found themselves inexplicably restrained. Fleets that had once moved with chaotic independence now acted as if guided by an invisible hand. Armies once fragmented found cohesion, their strategies and movements imbued with preternatural foresight. Even in regions far from Terra, the subtle influence of the Crimson God ensured that order, though strange and terrifying in its suddenness, spread. Yet resistance persisted. The forces of chaos, fragmented yet cunning, recognized the threat this new god posed. Khorne's demonic hordes struck out with unrelenting fury, their rituals and summoning rites now countered by forces they could not fully understand. Tzeentch's manipulations faltered as prophetic visions guided the Blood Angels to intersect and disrupt his schemes. Nurgle's plagues were neutralized by psychic interventions, and Slaanesha's seductions found no purchase on minds already bound to divine purpose. Across the stars, battles erupted on every scale, each one a test of the Crimson God's reach and power. The vengeful spirit became the epicenter of this cosmic conflict, a psychic cathedral from which the Crimson God orchestrated the defense and expansion of his influence. Its corridors pulsed with the red thirst, feeding back into his consciousness, shaping reality subtly, yet irrevocably. Mortal captains, psychic adepts, and even demonic entities were affected, their actions and decisions guided, constrained, or repelled by the predator angel who had risen to supremacy. On Terra, the Emperor observed with a mixture of grief, awe, and apprehension. Though crippled and confined to the Golden Throne, his psychic presence allowed him to perceive the shifting tides of influence. He understood that direct confrontation was impossible, for his son had become more than a mortal or a primarch. Sanguinius had become an axis of divinity, his influence stretching across both the material universe and the warp. The Emperor's sorrow deepened, tempered by the realization that the galaxy's fate had changed irreversibly. The Blood Angels became the most visible instruments of the Crimson God's will. Chapters previously scattered and isolated now acted as extensions of a divine network, their movements coordinated with unparalleled precision. Fleet engagements, planetary defenses, and psychic interventions reflected a seamless integration of mortal skill and divine guidance. Across countless worlds, the red thirst was no longer a curse, but a tool, allowing warriors to harness their inner fury with control and focus, channeling it toward decisive action in the ongoing conflict. Chaos responded with desperation. Across the warp, the Pantheon reeled from the emergence of a new god, one whose presence disrupted their dominion. Rituals were undone, cults splintered, and demonic incursions faltered before even reaching the material plane. Khorne's warbands, previously unstoppable, found themselves intercepted, their assaults redirected or annihilated by the unseen will of the Crimson God. Tzeentch's schemes unraveled under prophetic guidance, Nurgle's plagues dissolved in the face of divine intervention, and Slaanesh's seductions found themselves resisted by minds imbued with purpose and clarity. Across the stars, battles erupted on every scale, each one a test of the Crimson God's reach and power. The vengeful spirit became the epicenter of this cosmic conflict, a psychic cathedral from which the Crimson God orchestrated the defense and expansion of his influence. Its corridors pulsed with the red thirst, feeding back into his consciousness, shaping reality subtly yet irrevocably. Mortal captains, psychic adepts, and even demonic entities were affected, their actions and decisions guided, constrained, or repelled by the predator angel who had risen to supremacy. On Terra, the Emperor observed with a mixture of grief, awe, and apprehension. Though crippled and confined to the Golden Throne, his psychic presence allowed him to perceive the shifting tides of influence. He understood that direct confrontation was impossible, for his son had become more than a mortal or a primarch. Sanguinius had become an axis of divinity, his influence stretching across both the material universe and the warp. The Emperor's sorrow deepened, tempered by the realization that the galaxy's fate had changed irreversibly. The Blood Angels became the most visible instruments of the Crimson God's will. Chapters previously scattered and isolated now acted as extensions of a divine network, their movements coordinated with unparalleled precision. Fleet engagements, planetary defenses, and psychic interventions reflected a seamless integration of mortal skill and divine guidance. Across countless worlds, the red thirst was no longer a curse, but a tool, allowing warriors to harness their inner fury with control and focus, channeling it toward decisive action in the ongoing conflict. Chaos responded with desperation. Across the warp, the Pantheon reeled from the emergence of a new god, one whose presence disrupted their dominion. Rituals were undone, cults splintered, and demonic incursions faltered before even reaching the material plane. Khorne's warbands, previously unstoppable, found themselves intercepted, their assaults redirected or annihilated by the unseen will of the Crimson God. Tzeentch's schemes unraveled under prophetic guidance, Nurgle's plagues dissolved in the face of divine intervention, and Slaanesh's seductions found themselves resisted by minds imbued with purpose and clarity. Across the stars, battles erupted on every scale, each one a test of the Crimson God's reach and power. The first part of the war was thus established. The galaxy was divided, not by borders alone, but by allegiance, understanding, and influence. The Blood Angels, empowered and guided, became a beacon of divine authority. Chaos, scattered yet cunning, sought to counter this force, and the Crimson God, predator angel of unimaginable power, orchestrated it all with relentless precision, ensuring that the age of humanity would unfold according to his will, even if the cost was eternal vigilance and insatiable hunger.
The galaxy had become a battlefield not of mere armies, but of divinities, mortals, and the warp itself. The rise of the Crimson God had created a new axis of power, a force neither wholly mortal nor fully divine, and every system felt its presence. The Blood Angels, now instruments of a predator angel's will, struck across the stars with unparalleled precision. Entire fleets disappeared in coordinated strikes. Entire planets were pacified or defended before rebellion could arise, and demonic incursions were crushed before they could take root. The forces of chaos, scattered and desperate, attempted to adapt. Khorne's legions clashed with Blood Angels infused by the red thirst and guided by divine foresight. Every skull, every blade, every act of fury met with counterforce so precise it seemed omniscient. Tzeentch's manipulations, once subtle and all-encompassing, faltered as premonitions guided loyalist forces to anticipate and intercept every move. Nurgle's plagues were neutralized, dissipated by psychic interventions and strategic placement of empowered warriors. Slaanesh's seductive whispers fell silent before minds honed by the Crimson God's divine will. Across the stars, chaos found its influence fractured, its power contested, and its plans unraveling in ways the gods themselves could scarcely comprehend. The vengeful spirit remained the epicenter of this new order. Once a fortress of chaos and the throne of Horus, it had become a psychic cathedral, pulsing with the red thirst and the will of Sanguinius. Every corridor, every chamber, every deck resonated with divine presence. Those who entered felt the weight of his gaze, a consciousness that stretched across light years, shaping events with the precision of a god who was both predator and protector. Visitors, whether loyalist or traitor, mortal or immortal, felt themselves tested, judged, and, in some cases, reshaped by his presence. On Terra, the Emperor observed silently from the Golden Throne. Though crippled and confined, his mind reached across the Imperium, perceiving the unfolding events. He saw the galaxy bending under the influence of his son, yet he could not act directly without risking further disruption. Grief, awe, and apprehension mingled in his thoughts. Sanguinius had become more than a son, more than a primarch. He was now a sovereign axis, a divine presence whose will reshaped reality itself. The Emperor understood that the age to come would bear the indelible mark of the Crimson God. Across countless systems, the Blood Angels' influence manifested with clarity and brutality.
planetary defenses became impenetrable. Fleets moved with uncanny synchronicity. Armies coordinated across light years, executed strategies that were both precise and adaptive, responding to threats before they even arose. The Red Thirst, once a curse, now flowed as a disciplined river of purpose, guiding warriors to acts of judgment, mercy, and calculated destruction. Mortals and immortals alike felt the presence of a god who demanded reverence yet offered protection. Chaos gods attempted retaliation, but the scales had shifted. Khorne's assaults were met with devastating counterattacks. Tzeentch's plots were undone by foresight and preemptive action. Nurgle's rot and disease could not penetrate the spheres of influence surrounding worlds aligned with the Crimson God. Slaanesh's temptations failed against minds strengthened by divine purpose. Even the warp itself was reshaped, currents bending to acknowledge this new axis of power, a god born of blood, wrath, and mercy, whose influence contested the dominion of forces older than humanity itself. The battles escalated in intensity and scale. Entire sectors became theaters of divine conflict, where loyalist fleets clashed with demonic legions and mortal rebels, each engagement influenced subtly yet decisively by the Crimson God. Planets were defended not only by armies, but by psychic shields, premonitions, and the guiding hand of a predator angel whose mind spanned the stars. The Red Thirst, pulsing through every blood angel, became both weapon and compass, ensuring that every strike was efficient, every maneuver precise, and every engagement tilted toward victory. Despite the unrelenting tide of conquest, Sanguinius remained vigilant. The Red Thirst reminded him of hunger, of predation, of necessity. Yet his consciousness extended beyond the selfish desire for blood, guiding entire worlds, fleets, and minds toward stability, purpose, and survival. He was predator and protector, wrath and mercy, hunger and conscience, a divine balance forged from the crucible of the siege of Terra and the death of Horus. The ecclesiarchy struggled to maintain its influence. Some factions declared outright heresy, denouncing Sanguinius as a false god who challenged the emperor. Others adapted, finding ways to reconcile worship of both the emperor and the Crimson God. Cults flourished in secrecy and openness alike, spreading across worlds, offering guidance, protection, and judgment. The Imperium, long bound by a single axis of faith, now operated under two forces, the Golden Father and the Crimson Sun, whose influence intersected, collided, and coalesced in complex and often unpredictable ways. The final confrontation approached not in a single location, but across the galaxy. Every system, every fleet, every army became a node in the vast web of influence spun by the predator angel. Chaos, desperate and cunning, sought weak points, openings in the network, but none existed. Every move, every strike, every psychic pulse was anticipated, countered, or redirected by forces guided directly by the Crimson God. The universe had become both battlefield and chessboard, and Sanguinius had become the master player, omnipresent, omniscient, and relentless. At the climax of this galactic war, Sanguinius's influence reached its full extent. The Red Thirst burned brighter than ever before, no longer a torment, but a beacon of power, guiding his actions across countless light years simultaneously. Armies followed instincts that were no longer their own, but extensions of his divine will. Fleets maneuvered with precision that bordered on omniscience. Planets previously lost or chaotic were stabilized under his watchful gaze. The balance of power in the galaxy shifted irrevocably. Chaos faltered, mortal rebellion subsided, and the Imperium entered an age governed not solely by the Emperor, but by the predator angel who had ascended to godhood. And yet, even in triumph, the red thirst remained eternal. Hunger pulsed through Sanguinius' veins, a reminder that even gods are bound by desire. Mercy and wrath intertwined, judgment and protection danced in tandem. The Crimson God had reshaped the galaxy, but his vigilance was endless, his conscience bound to the weight of his power, and his hunger eternal. The age of blood and light was born, a new epoch in which mortals, immortals, and gods alike recognized the predator angel's dominion. Battles would continue, conflicts would erupt, and the universe would evolve under his watchful gaze. The galaxy trembled not in fear alone, but in awe, anticipation, and recognition of a new axis of power. The Crimson God had risen, and nothing would ever return to the way it once was.
The galaxy had been forever changed. The age of blood and light had dawned, and the predator angel who had once been a sun now walked among mortals and gods alike, reshaping the stars with every heartbeat, every thought, every pulse of the red thirst. Chaos faltered, the Imperium adapted, and everywhere, across countless worlds, the Blood Angels carried the legacy of the Crimson God, balancing hunger with purpose, wrath with mercy, and mortality with divinity. The universe watched in silence. Battles would rage, empires would rise and fall, and yet, through it all, one truth remained. The Crimson God endured, eternal and insatiable, a predator and protector, a god of blood, light, and vengeance. And in that endless vigilance, the stars themselves seemed to weep, to bleed, and to shine, for the son of the Emperor had become something more, something eternal, something that would echo across eternity. The story had ended, yet the legend of the Crimson God had only just begun.